All right. Welcome everyone to the Youth Leadership Development Program's next video session with our special guests, Reb Rebel and Grace Cormier. Youth Leadership Development Program's mission is to develop our youth into talent with leadership skills and to join the workforce and community leadership. Today's program evolved as I reached out to Adam Grant to talk to him about how can I use the concepts of originals and giver and taker for the program's children, and how can we make that into something we can use in our leadership development programs. And so he rightly put me towards our guests, Reb and Grace, from the Positive Psychology Center at University of Pennsylvania. To give you a background about Reb Rebel, he's a researcher at the Wharton People Analytics and also teaches positive psychology at the university's Masters for Positive Psychology. And he is a frequent collaborator with Adam Grant and on topics of giving and originality. To learn a little more about Reb, you can go to his website, rebrebel.com. And Grace Cormier is the Senior Program Manager for Resilience Training Programs at the Positive Psychology Center. Her research is driven to apply the behavioral sciences to the way we can work and actually change the way we work. So thank you so much and welcome to you both, Reb and Grace, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited.
So I work with children between the ages in grades 3 through 12, which means we are pretty much covering most of the high school age children. So how would you explain positive psychology to them, and what is really positive psychology?
Yes, I think the way that I would describe it is that positive psychology is essentially an area of psychology research and practice that focuses on the good things in life. So things like well-being and character and success. So really people who work in positive psychology on the research side are trying to study what makes people happy, what makes people successful, what makes people live the lives that they want to live. And how can we help people get there? And then people who work on the practice side of positive psychology often sort of try to understand that research and bring it to people through schools, organizations, medicine, all sorts of different areas. Grace, what do you think? How do you tend to define positive psych?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, just like Reb said, positive psychology is kind of the study of human happiness and well-being. And I think the thing that makes positive psychology so interesting is that it really departs from historically the focus of psychology, which was more deficit focused, and brings the light on a strengths focus. And it really kind of came onto the map when Marty Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania was the head of the American Psychological Association, I think in the late 90s. And he really kind of gave like a call to action to the field of psychology to think, we don't need to be focusing on how to bring people from -5 to 0. We need to be focusing on how to bring people from 0 to +5. And kind of like Reb was saying, there's the research of that, and then there's the application, and people kind of bring that idea of what makes people successful, what makes people happy to a lot of different fields like law, medicine, education.
How do you put this forward? Well-being may not be the first word children gravitate towards. They would say, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, or they would be able to identify with emotions. And I'm not sure if children really look at the word well-being. What do you say to them about well-being, and what are some of the ways that they would be able to make use of that?
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting when people think about like well-being. There's a lot of different people say happiness, people say well-being, people say positive emotion. But when I think that there's a really good model called PERMA, and it's actually PERMAH, and that kind of just is a really good acronym for thinking about well-being, and it talks about the different components that well-being might encompass. So it's positive emotion, engagement, meaning, relationships, accomplishment, and then health or vitality has been recently added. So I think that, well-being, kind of like you're saying, is this really big phrase that a lot of people might not necessarily gravitate towards. But thinking about kind of those components, like how much positive emotion do I have in my life? How much meaning do I have in my life? How are my relationships in my life? Can kind of be a better way to think about well-being and happiness. I don't know if, Reb, you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so I think what I might say is to think about when you are your best self, and think about when you have your best days, and think about what you sort of imagine would be the best life that you could live. Those are the things that I think of when I think of well-being. So your best self sort of brings into mind for a lot of people when you say like, oh, I was the best version of me that day, is often when you did something really well, or you did something kind or caring or compassionate, of high character. When you think about the best version of you, that's often what people think of. And so that's one part, I think, of what positive psychology is interested in. In terms of best days, I think about, when you have a really great day, oftentimes people say that that's a day that was filled with laughter or joy or fun, but also hard and interesting work if it's work that you care about. So I think about a really great day, that's a day that's high in well-being. And then if you think about your best life, the life that you want to live over time, right? One great day where you ride roller coasters and eat ice cream is fantastic. But if you did that literally every day, you'd get bored of it. You would, have a lot of stomach issues from too much ice cream and too many roller coasters. So if you think about what actually sustains us and fulfills us over our entire lives, there's a broad range of things that we care about. So I think that when we think about well-being or happiness, it's not just, it's partly about those moments that are just fantastic fun, where you're laughing and you're feeling joy, or where you're feeling really peaceful. But it's also about more than that. It's about how do you, be the person that you want to be in the world.
In your studies that you conduct at the university, have you worked with children
Yeah, so actually a lot of the seminal research in positive psychology, particularly at the University of Pennsylvania, actually arose from that, what Grace is describing as the deficit model, or focusing on some of the challenges. So Marty Seligman and Karen Rivich and Judy Salzberg and many others here at Penn were looking in the 80s and 90s at what they saw was a growing issue where depression, which typically is something that, historically didn't occur to people, people didn't experience until they were adults, was starting to occur much more commonly for children. So the average age of the first onset of depression used to be around 30. And it dropped down to 14, right? So teenagers were much more commonly experiencing things like depression and anxiety. And so the question was, how do we help equip children to be better able to deal with the kinds of things that might spark depression and anxiety and behavioral challenges at school? So that's actually where they started studying resilience. They started asking the question, what are the tools that we learn, that we know from psychology might help people actually become more resilient? And so they developed a program called the Penn Resilience Program that was sort of a launching pad for early resilience intervention research at Penn, and then subsequently positive psychology. How can you teach kids how to be more resilient, how to be more optimistic? Mm-hmm. And actually also I met my wife studying positive psychology, and she's a school teacher. So she has taught every grade from first grade through 12th grade, and mostly in Australia, but also in other places around the world. And what she and other educators are doing is asking the question of, how can we bring a strengths focus to the way we teach our classes? So how can we read books and understand the characters through the lens of what are they really good at? What makes them fulfilled and happy? What can we do to incorporate well-being into the classroom. So a focus on children is pretty prominent in positive psych.
Yeah, and I think nowadays there's a lot of emphasis on working with happy kids more than academically happy kids.
And one of the things that so Marty Seligman often says is he asks parents in many of his speeches, in 2 words or fewer, what do you most want for your children? And the audience typically thinks about it, and you hear words like love, happiness, joy, peace, success, those kinds of things. And then Marty asks, okay, well, in 2 words or fewer, what do schools teach? And there's this kind of sort of nervous laughter in the audience as parents say, math and English, or discipline, or conformity, or any number of things that don't align with what parents say they most want for their kids. And so Marty uses that as a jumping off point to say, well, shouldn't part of the focus of schools be to teach and help students and children experience the things that you most want for them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Grace, in your studies in resilience, have you found that the resilience of children has decreased or increased?
Yeah. So a lot of the early work that Karen Rivich was doing with Marty Seligman and others found that their program, the Penn Resilience Program, significantly reduced depression and anxiety and increased resilience and well-being. And then what they did is they brought that Penn Resilience Program that they were doing with children and brought it to the Army as well as other settings. And they've also found positive results in those settings. So it does show positive results, which is exciting.
Talk to us a little bit about what is resilience and what interested you to study it.
Yeah, definitely. So just like happiness and well-being, I think that, there are different definitions of resilience, and kind of how our shop at Penn described resilience. It's the ability to not only bounce back from adversity, but also to grow and thrive in the face of adversity. And I think that, really what determines whether or not a person is going to be resilient is how they respond to failure. And Marty Seligman's early research around optimism found that, people who are faced with failure, and in failure, they don't think of it as permanent. So it's not something that's going to last forever. They don't think of it as pervasive. So it's not something that's going to affect all areas of my life. It's just contained in that one area. And it's not my fault. They don't take it personally. So I think people who have that kind of response to adversity that isn't, totally overtaking their lives are better able to be flexible. They're better able to problem solve, and they're better able to kind of move beyond that adversity. But also, there's other things, related to adversity, and that is relationships. So people who have strong, abiding relationships in their life are better able to tap on those people when they're faced with an adversity and move beyond it. And, character is a big thing too. So when I'm faced with an adversity, am I somebody who kind of gives into it, or am I the person who kind of draws on the better parts of myself to try to overcome that adversity? And so I think there's a lot of the study of resilience and the study of positive psychology. I mean, the things that, obviously are the focus of positive psychology are also so focused to resilience and how people respond to adversity.
Okay.
And adversity might be another one of those words that some children listening might not be as familiar with. So just a couple of examples that might make it feel a little bit more close to home. So I talked earlier about best days. Well, what about bad days or worst days, right? Mm-hmm. So, adversities are the days, are the experiences that lead to those days where you come home and you're feeling sort of beat up or worn down, or like things aren't quite going your way. And sometimes they're quote unquote little things like failing a test, which feel like big things in the moment. And other times they are really big things. They're things like losing a parent or a loved one, or having a breakup in a social relationship, or having a friendship that breaks down for some reason, or facing illness. So adversities are all those kinds of challenges that we have to deal with. And sometimes it's because we ourselves stumbled and failed, like, not doing as well on a test or an assignment or at a sport, that we were working really hard at. And other times it's because something else happened that was outside of our control. And resilience in a lot of ways is, how do we deal with those kinds of things? It's also, how do we deal with some of the good kinds of things that push us and challenge us? So it's not just about adversity, but a lot of it focuses on how do we do those things. And Adam Grant, who you mentioned earlier, our colleague, has just written a book with Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook about exactly this topic. It's called Option B, and it's written motivated in part because Sheryl lost her husband unexpectedly, and her kids lost their dad unexpectedly. He had a heart condition and he died suddenly, and the family was left to figure out, how do we deal with this? How do we process the grief, and how do we move forward in life? And part of the subtitle of the book is, how do we rediscover joy? How do we actually not let this really sad, terrible experience make us sad forever, right? How do we, find a way to experience that sadness appropriately and productively, but then still do the things that we want to do in life and live good lives?
Do you have any tips that will go along with that?
The thing is, resilience is a challenging process. So a lot of the work that we do in the Penn Resilience program focuses a lot on paying attention to how we think about those events. So a lot of what we've learned in psychology research is that oftentimes what makes dealing with a hard event harder is the way that we're thinking about it. So something bad happens and we blame ourselves, right? We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to say, like, oh, I failed this test because I'm a terrible student, right? And part of the reason why you're upset is because you failed the test. But then part of the reason on top of that is because you're telling yourself that you're a terrible student, right? And you're telling yourself these sort of things that make you feel worse about what you did and don't necessarily get you moving forward to taking more productive action. So one of the tips, so to speak, is to pay attention to essentially the story you're telling yourself in response to that adversity. And a good shorthand that our colleagues often say is, ask yourself, is the way that I'm thinking about this helping or hurting me, right? Am I thinking about this in a way that is making it easier for me to move forward? Or am I thinking about this in a way that's making it more challenging for me to move forward? And if you're thinking about it in a way that's hurting, that's making it harder for you to move forward, ask yourself things like, well, is what I'm saying to myself really accurate, right? Or is there another way that I could be thinking about this situation that might help me move forward more productively? Grace, what are some of your favorite tips in the resilience space?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of going off what Brad was just saying, we have this tendency, right, following adversity to focus on the negative. It's called the negativity bias in psychology terms. So, and even just not facing an adversity, but just going throughout your daily life, right? Like, we're more likely to remember the guy who parked us in, the fact that you were 5 minutes late to a meeting or to school, and, your teacher got mad at you or whatever. And so I think something that, we teach in a lot of our resilience courses is to kind of get rid of the negativity bias, or, lessen the negativity bias by focusing on what's good. And so a lot of people do that by keeping a gratitude journal. And at the end of the day, they write down 3 good things that happened to them during the day. And it doesn't have to be like wonderful things or great things like I won the lottery, but it can be something as simple as, I saw a friend help another friend in the lunchroom and I thought that was really cool. Or, I scored a goal at the soccer game. And so I think making effort to focus on what's good in your life can really kind of offset some of the things that more negatively or happen to you that are more negative.
One other thing I'll add just briefly is to reach out, right? So oftentimes when we're dealing with something that is challenging, our tendency can be to focus inward, to just like stew and focus privately on ourselves. My video went away there. Sorry about that. There we go. So we can go inward and focus, on our own experience of that challenge, and forget to reach out to the people around us who could be helpful in that situation. So, Adam and I study giving a lot, and there are a lot of people out there. Most people, in fact, would like to be helpful to other people. They value being a kind, caring, compassionate person. They're happy to be helpful, but oftentimes they either don't know that you're dealing with a difficult situation, or they're not quite sure what they could do that would be helpful. We find that 70 to 90% of helpful acts in organizations come because somebody had the courage to ask for help, right? And so one thing I would say is to don't put it all on yourself, to be resilient in every situation. Resilience is not just about what you yourself can endure. It's about how you connect with the community of people around you to sort of together move forward.
Usually in high school situations, or I guess after the kid turns about 10, 12, in their tweens, they start relying on their peers more than their parents or any other adult that's around them. How can you be a supportive peer group and help someone who is in adversity? Or what is it that children can do? Because sometimes they feel, oh, maybe I'm not the person to do this thing. They have their own self-doubt, and much less how do you help someone else?
Yeah, some of my favorite examples of this recently are examples of people who just start offering help, and they make it as hard as possible for the other person to refuse the help, or make it as easy as possible for the other person to accept it. So for example, if somebody's going through a hard time and you have the ability to go see them, you could text them, and I've heard this story, you could text them and say, tell me what you do not want on the hamburger that I'm about to go get for you. Right. And so the message is clear. It's like, oh, I'm going to get some food and I'm going to bring you some. And unless you tell me what you don't want, I'm going to make the choice for you. Right. And then another one was an example of a parent whose kid was sick. And so a friend of this parent said, texted the parent and said, I'm in the hospital lobby right now with a teddy bear. I'll be here for the next 15 minutes. If you want to come down and pick it up, great. If not, I'm leaving, no worries. And then the parent texted back and said, please come upstairs. They had a great conversation. It was really helpful and emotional. So part of it is to just show up and try something, because most of the time, even if you're not exactly on the mark, you're going to, at least signal to that friend that you care, right? And that you're paying attention and that you see what they're working through. To echo what Grace was saying before too about helping people over time, not just when they're dealing with the adversity itself, is friends can boost each other's resilience by spotting each other's strengths and pointing them out, right? And by being there when things go right. Right. So we focus a lot in resilience on when things go wrong, but there's this great research by Shelley Gable on what they call active constructive responding, which is how do your friends and loved ones and colleagues show up for you when you've got good news? And so one of the best things friends can do to build up the sort of resilience, like the immune system for resilience over time of their friends, is to help their friends see when they're doing things really well and to help them celebrate when something goes really well, because those good experiences give us more strength that we can draw on when we have, an adversity come our way.
Okay. So you say give, right? Just show up. So what does it mean to be a giver? And does it create a character? Does it build a character in a child? And is there a long-term success attached to that?
Yeah, so a giver is somebody who, when they're interacting with other people, tries to find a way to be helpful. So a giver is somebody whose orientation is to say, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking about, what do I have to offer here? Can I tell you about something that I've heard about that you might be interested in? Can I offer to lend a hand? Can I give you some advice that would be helpful? Can I introduce you to somebody who might be, beneficial to you and you could be beneficial to them? Most people seem to want to be givers. Like they would rather be the kind of person who is helpful to other people. In surveys literally around the world, people endorse giving values over personal achievement values far more often than not. But not everybody actually acts like a giver. So there's also what we call in our research takers. Takers are people who, when they're interacting with other people, they're listening for what's in it for me. And it's not necessarily that a taker is trying to take advantage of another person. It's just that they're focused on their own goals and their own happiness. And when they hear somebody talking about something that will help them with those goals or happiness, they try to figure out how they can get some of that for themselves. And then there's a third group called matchers, which is actually what most people are most of the time, which is that matchers want to keep things even in relationships. Mm-hmm. So if you do something nice for a matcher is going to go out of their way to thank you and do something nice in return. If you do something bad to a matcher is probably going to want to repay the favor that way too, and get back at you because they want things to be even, right? They want things to be fair and equitable and just between people. So what we find in the research, and this is research led by our colleague Adam, is that givers over time are statistically more likely to be successful across a wide range of professions than matchers or takers. So the givers are more likely to have high grades at the end of med school. They're more likely to, sell more things as salespeople. They're more likely to have high quality, highly productive engineering products when they're engineers. So givers are more likely to end up at the top. Unfortunately, other givers are also more likely to end up at the bottom. Right? So when we focus too much on helping other people, we can burn ourselves out. Mm-hmm. And we can sacrifice our own well-being. Givers actually, on average, make $7,000 less per year, according to one study, than matchers or takers, because the giver's sitting there in the negotiation and they're thinking, oh, well, that sounds good enough to me. I hope it works for you, rather than negotiating for their own salary. So it's great to be a giver. You can be really successful as a giver, but you also have to pay attention to your own well-being and your own needs. And a lot of our work now is focused on, what we call generosity burnout, how to be a giver, but still be successful yourself. So I would say being a giver is good, but think about how you're doing it. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a martyr. It doesn't mean that you have to give yourself up to other people all the time. In fact, you'll actually be a less productive, less effective giver if you yourself are burnt out and worn down.
Mm-hmm. In relation to the salary aspect that came up,
I've probably just convinced people not to be givers.
The kids are going to tell me, why should I be a giver then? How do they balance that out? And be a matcher, I guess, is the matcher the best place to be at?
No, so matchers, it's totally fine to be a matcher, right? Most people are matchers most of the time. But matchers, success-wise, end up somewhere in the middle, right? And matchers are often constantly keeping score. So what we find is that the most successful place to be is to be what Adam calls an otherish giver, or what we sometimes call a self-protective giver. So you can be a giver who goes out of their way to help other people, but knows that at some point you have to cut it off and say, I need some time to go do my own homework, or I need some time to go work on my own skills, or I need time to just go do something fun or relaxing. So self-protective givers get the success benefits of being helpful, but they don't necessarily have as many of the trade-offs. For the salary thing, if you're a giver who's worried about that, my best piece of advice would be to go into any job negotiation where you're going to get offered a salary and think about your family that's going to benefit from the salary that you're getting. So when givers think about something like salary, not in terms of how good it is for them, but in terms of how it might help other people, then they become really they can become really effective negotiators.
So having kids get into the mindset of giving, how is it that they can tap into their own originality to say, here is where I show up and this is how I'm going to show up?
Yeah, so one of the other things that we study a lot is sort of creativity and originality. And I think a lot of people are interested in how can I be creative? How can I do something great, right? Like how can I create a great, bit of art or music or film, or, how can I be an athlete who pushes the boundaries of what's possible, or a mathematician who, does things in really creative ways. But what we find is that actually a laser focus just on creativity and expertise tends to be less successful than what we call originals. And originals are people who are creative, but with an eye toward how can I do something that is going to help other people move forward, right? How can I actually, with my creativity and with my strength and my expertise, actually make the world a better place? So I would say the way like giving and originality are connected is that the really successful creative individuals are those who not only focused on what can I do that's new or different and that's uniquely me, but focused on how can I use my strengths and what I know and what I'm capable of to benefit other people in some new way.
Okay. And Grace, in your studies in resilience, have you seen children emerge out of themselves because of adversity or because they've been in situations as such?
Yeah, definitely. So there's this area of research called post-traumatic growth. And that kind of, so it'd be after following an adversity, they would never want the adversity. They would never say, oh, I would want to relive that adversity, but they feel like that adversity kind of gave them a new outlook on life, and they're able to see new possibilities, and they have more meaning and closer relationships. So we definitely see that, people following an adversity can kind of move, from 0 to +5 and even beyond, and really kind of approach their life in a new kind of refreshed way following an adversity.
This is a story of every superhero ever, by the way.
Yeah.
Patton Oswalt, the comedian, talks about this. Like if you read the origin story of Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman, all of these superheroes have these really traumatic experiences in their childhood, and they turn that into a source of strength, right? And to some extent, that's a little bit oversold, right? Like most people don't necessarily, most people don't become superheroes, period. But there is a lot of research that shows that this is a really real thing, that people can turn really difficult, challenging circumstances and experiences into a source of real strength and power and character that guides them going forward. So, if you're going through a tough time, figure out how to, help you turn into a superhero.
Okay. To all our superheroes that we would be developing through the Youth Leadership Development Program, thank you so much to both of you for being here and giving me the insights of how we could develop children into more resilient and superheroes. Reb, your video froze for a bit, so we did get your voice, but thank you so much, because I cannot really see you and say thank you. Thank you so much, Grace, for your time. I look forward to maybe you visiting our youth leadership program at some point in time. So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.